The dangerous Haitian gang reportedly responsible for holding 17 Christian missionaries hostage is now demanding a ransom. It comes as the U.S. government and FBI continue to work on the group's safe return home. Manuel Bojorquez has the latest from Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince.
Police at this checkpoint today inspected vehicles headed towards the gang-held territory. CBS News has learned the hostage takers' initial demand is $1 million for each of the 17 missionary hostages. Christian Aid Ministries in Ohio released a statement about the victims. The adults range in age from 18 to 48. The 5 children from 15 years to just 8 months old. We went to a government ministry in Port-au-Prince today, but officials would not comment, citing the sensitive nature of negotiations with the notorious 400 Mawozo gang, which is accused of kidnapping the 16 Americans and 1 Canadian Saturday after the missionaries visited an orphanage near the capital. This is where the 400 Mawozo gang's territory begins. Their headquarters not far from here, but we're told it's simply too dangerous to approach. To give you a sense of how large an area they control, it extends from here more than 20 miles to the border with the Dominican Republic. The FBI is in Haiti working with the authorities. Today, the White House took a firm stand against giving in to the kidnappers.
Because that's has never been in the interest of bringing people home who are being held for ransom.
In the U.S., churches affiliated with Christian Aid Ministries continue to pray and wait. A family of 5 from Oceana, Michigan is among the hostages. Todd Dooling is a local pastor there.
To have it hit that close to home is extremely heartbreaking.
For more, I want to bring in Robert Fatton, Jr. He is the Julia A. Cooper Professor of Government and Foreign Affairs at the University of Virginia. Thanks very much for joining us. So kidnappings have unfortunately become more common in Haiti. What is so alarming about this particular abduction?
Well, it shows that the criminal gangs are going beyond Haitians, and they are attacking foreigners, and they are clearly wanting more money. Although that particular gang which captured, kidnapped the American religious people had done so already. They had kidnapped some French Catholic priests and nuns. They were eventually released. It's not at all clear whether the French government or the Catholic Church paid them, but they were eventually released.
Well, how have gangs in Haiti evolved over the past 2 decades?
Well, there was a beginning of gang activities in the early 2000s when Jean-Bertrand Aristide was president and there was turmoil. The gangs were paid by some members from the government. They were also paid by members of the opposition, by different political parties, and by the private sector. So the gangs are not a new phenomenon. What is new is the violence and their capacity to act now with great autonomy. In other words, if you were to look at what happened over the weekend, it was a rather amazing event whereby one of the gang leaders, a fellow by the name of Cerisier, who is known also as Barbecue, prevented with his gangs the prime minister and the chief of police from going to a commemoration for the founder of Haiti, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So the prime minister and the chief of police had to leave the area, and a few hours afterwards, Barbecue appeared with something like 1,000 followers with flowers and gangs, and he commemorated, as if he were a chief of state, the anniversary of the assassination of Dessalines. So that shows that the government has lost control over vast areas of Port-au-Prince. And it's a situation where the very survival of the state seems to be at stake.
Right, because it has been a particularly tumultuous time in Haiti. A month after Haiti's president was assassinated, a 7.2 magnitude earthquake devastated parts of the island. How have the gangs impacted relief efforts in the country?
Well, one of the great problems for relief is how to go to the southern part of the country where the earthquake and the storms affected the people in those areas. And the gangs control the main highway going to the south. and they have used that control to prevent some relief operations from happening, and they have also asked for money to let trucks and doctors to go by. There has been also some kidnappings of doctors who were willing to help. So it's a very serious problem in terms of the capacity of the government to deal with the many problems that it is facing now. And it's not at all clear that the government has the capacity to really deal with those gangs and force them to exit the key areas in Port-au-Prince. If anything, over the last 2 or 3 months, the gangs have really expanded their territories, and many areas which were not previously affected by that violence, the kidnappings, the ransoms, etc., are now clearly under the gangs.
Well, as we previously mentioned, the 400 Mawozo gang is demanding millions of dollars in ransom for the release of the missionaries. How has the U.S. government dealt with ransom situations like this in the past?
Well, the U.S. says officially that it is not willing to pay ransom, and we can understand that because it would invite even more kidnappings. Now, the U.S. has sent the FBI in Haiti, and it's not clear whether the FBI is completely in charge of the operation. They are cooperating with the Haitian police, and they are trying to find the area where the Americans have been put in hiding by the gangs. So it's a very difficult thing because where the gangs operate, it's usually in slums, and it's very difficult to penetrate those slums without the gangs knowing so. So they could move the people they have kidnapped very quickly from one area to another. I assume that the FBI has the capacity, the technical capacity to follow some phone calls, etc. So they may be able to locate the gangs and the unfortunate people who have been kidnapped by them.
Well, how could international groups and other countries help Haiti with its security issues?
This is a huge problem because after the fall of Jean-Bertrand Aristide in 2004, the United Nations went into Haiti with a lot of peacekeepers and a significant amount of money. The idea was to curb the violence and create the institutions that would allow the Haitian government and the police to function normally. The problem is that once the UN, which was known as MINUSTA, left the country 3 years ago, things started to fall apart. And most Haitians are not too friendly to the UN and to foreign forces because the UN, even though it reestablished a semblance of order, did leave a trail of sorrows. There were incidents, major incidents of sexual abuse, and the most critical thing was clearly the fact that the UN peacekeepers brought cholera to Haiti, and that Haiti has not recovered fully from that, and that the promise of compensation have not materialized. And finally, the UN, when it was involved in the destruction, if you wish, of the gangs, had used significant force, and there were what they used to call collateral damage, and that has left a bitter taste in Haitian mouths. So it's a complicated business. But the reality is that if the Haitians can't resolve their political problems, the international community may take over. I'm not quite sure how they would do that, because it's clearly something that the Biden administration doesn't want to do. But there is talk of regional assistance. There is even talk of some form of American assistance to the police. The problem is that time is running out, and the gangs are becoming increasingly powerful and control vast areas of the country.
Well, clearly an extremely complicated, difficult situation. We'll continue to track it. Robert Fatton, Jr., thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you so much. Good night.